Earlier this year, we looked at the DJI Osmo Pocket 4, but now we can finally take a look at the pocket camera many people have been waiting for, the DJI Osmo Pocket 4P. At first glance, the Pocket 4P might just look like a Pocket 4 with an extra camera attached, but is a lot more than that. There's one particular change inside that I found especially fascinating, and I genuinely think it could change not only this series, but also our expectations of what future cameras can do. And with all the upgrades combined, to me, this is the biggest change in this series since the very first Osmo Pocket camera. In some ways, I almost feel like this isn't really a pocket camera anymore. I'd like to thank DJI for inviting me to the Osmo event in Malta, so I have a chance to talk to the DJI team there and ask them questions, and that also allows me to test out the Pocket 4P in the beautiful Mediterranean country. As always, I will share with you all my real-world experience, including all the things I like and things I don't like about this camera. So let's get started. Let's talk about one of the biggest selling points of the Pocket 4P, the new camera module at the top. This is the first time an Osmo Pocket camera has featured two cameras. One camera is the familiar 20mm equivalent wide-angle camera with an f2 aperture lens, similar to what we saw on the Pocket 3 and Pocket 4. However, this camera now has a brand new 1-inch sensor, which is also a very important upgrade that we will talk more about later. Then there's the new 60mm equivalent lens with an f1.8 aperture. This is 3 times the focal length of the wide-angle camera, so for the rest of this video, I'll just call it the 3 times zoom camera, even though technically it is not a true zoom lens. And I will call the 20mm camera the wide-angle camera. The 3 times zoom camera's sensor is 1/1.28 inch, which is a bit smaller than the sensor for the wide-angle camera. Now interestingly, even though the 3 times zoom camera has a smaller sensor, because of the longer equivalent focal length and faster aperture, if you shoot portrait photos, you can actually get shallower depth of field with similar framing. Here are 2 photos of my daughter shot with the 2 different cameras using similar framing. The photo from the 3 times zoom camera has noticeably more background blur than the one from the wide-angle camera. It's still nowhere near the kind of background blur that you can get from a large sensor mirrorless camera, but it's definitely more than what you get from the previous Osmo cameras. There are multiple ways to control zoom. A single press of the new left button hidden behind the screen switches to 3 times zoom, a double press switches to 6 times, or you can press and hold the 2 new buttons to zoom in or out instead. If you zoom in, you can go all the way to 12 times zoom, or you can use the joystick to do the same thing. Personally, I usually use the buttons for zoom, which lets me keep the joystick free to control the camera movement. But because the joystick on the Pocket 4P is an analog stick, so if I use it to control zoom, I can control the zoom speed as well. The ability to go from 1 time all the way to 12 times, which is equivalent to full frame 240mm with continuous zoom, is a huge advantage compared to the previous Osmo Pocket cameras. For example, I was watching this rugby game, and I was way too far away to shoot properly with the wide-angle lens. But then I zoomed in all the way to 12 times, I could actually see and capture the game much better. If you go to a performance or concert and you are sitting quite far away, the zoom will be extremely useful. Now, because these are not true optical zoom lenses, anything that is not the native 1 time and 3 times zoom involves some level of cropping and resampling, so image quality does drop a bit. With the 3 times zoom lens, the image quality is very good at 3 times zoom. At 6 times, it is acceptable. Usually keep the zoom at 6 times maximum. Having a second camera and such a large zoom range isn't just about shooting things that are far away. If you have been following my channel for a while, you know I always say focal length is one of the most powerful creative tools in photography and videography. Shooting the same scene with different focal length can completely change how it looks. Going back to the two photos of my daughter, the image shot with the 3x zoom camera looks much more flattering than the one shot on the wide-angle camera. There's so much more you can do creatively with focal length. So having up to 12x zoom is really not just about zooming in on distant subjects. Another great thing about this new 3x zoom lens is that it makes it easy to capture some close-up shots of smaller subjects, and you also have more background separations. But for that zoom range to be genuinely useful, the stabilization system and tracking performance also need to keep up. We'll take a closer look at both later in this video. I think everyone noticed that when we are shooting video with our phone and we are zooming in or out and the phone has to switch between different cameras, there would be a sudden jump in the image. The sharpness, position, and color would change when it switches between different cameras. So it also happens with the Pocket 4P, and it will be more noticeable when your subject is at close distance. If you want to go wider than the standard 20mm equivalent focal length, you can do that using the 0.75x wide-angle attachment, which gives you a 15mm equivalent focal length, just like the previous pocket cameras. But because the shape of the camera module is now different, the wide-angle attachment is also completely different from the previous generation. This time, it's a small panel with two lenses. You twist it to remove it from the camera. It's actually quite similar to the system used on some DJI drones with dual lens cameras. You can also swap that out to install filters. Filters are very important if you want to create some cinematic footage. DJI has released a set of ND filters for the Pocket 4P, which includes a ND16, ND64, and ND256. There are also some other third-party filters already available in the market, which give you other options like CPL or mist filter. If you're interested in picking up some filters for your Pocket 4P, I put a link in the video description below. Now, this new design does have both pros and cons. The good thing is that it feels much more secure than the old design. It's very unlikely you lose the filter either because it falls off the camera or because it's too tiny to find. The downside is that, unlike the Pocket 4, where many people could reuse their existing filters, this time you'll need a completely new set. And because the design is more secure, I would usually need to switch off the camera before swapping the filter or wide-angle attachment. One interesting thing though, I originally thought there might be issues if you left the wide-angle attachment on and zoomed towards 3x and beyond. But surprisingly, it seems to work almost exactly the same as using the camera without the wide-angle attachment. Because the Pocket 4P is part of DJI's 4th generation Pocket series, it also inherits many of the upgrades that first arrived on the Pocket 4 a few months ago. If you haven't seen my Pocket 4 review yet, I recommend checking it out because I covered all of these upgrades in details there. So rather than repeating everything again, I'll just give you a quick summary as we talk about all the changes. Now let's have a look at the body design first. Apart from having the dual camera module at the top, the Pocket 4P body design is almost the same as the Pocket 4. The joystick is now analog, which responds depending on how much you push, so you can have more precise control of the camera movement speed or zoom speed. There are two extra buttons hidden behind the screen that are customizable for different single click, double click, or triple click action. These two new physical buttons may not sound like a big deal on paper, but in real-world use, they make the camera noticeably easier to operate than just relying on the touchscreen interface, which you always have to look very carefully or you may press something incorrectly. The downside of these two buttons is that if you flick the screen vertically to shoot vertical video, then you can no longer press these buttons. At the back of the gimbal, there is a magnetic mount for the new LED field light, which has 3 different brightness level and color temperature. With the latest firmware, the camera can now also auto-match the car temperature and brightness of this field light, which makes it even easier to use, especially for casual users. This is still not a weatherproof camera, but the micro SD memory card slot now has a cover to provide a bit more weather resistance. For me, I've not used the memory card slot at all, as the camera now comes with its 103GB internal storage inside. We can record approximately 11 hours of 1080p 30 video in standard bitrate using the internal storage. In 4K 30 is 4 hours 47 minutes in standard bitrate or 2 hours 43 minutes in high bitrate. If you record in 4K 60, you can record 3 hours 8 minutes standard or 1 hour 53 minutes high bitrate. Changing the color profile doesn't change the record time because they are all 10-bit. Wi-Fi and USB connection both upgraded to offer faster wireless and wide data transfer speed. You can also do live streaming easily by USB connection. And because the body design is mostly the same as Pocket 4 or even Pocket 3, accessories for the Pocket 3 and Pocket 4 like the extension grip or the battery handle would also fit the Pocket 4P, just not the filters or the hard carry case. And you can also use all the latest DJI mic with the Pocket 4P without needing to connect any receiver. So with the new dual camera module, the Pocket 4P does feel quite a bit bigger and heavier. The gimbal arms are a bit longer. One very nice thing is all the gimbal axes will lock securely when you shut down the camera. When I say lock, I don't mean it completely locks like the latest DJI rolling gimbal, but all the axes holds much stronger than the Pocket 3 or 4. It also locks the camera so it wouldn't move even if you touch it accidentally, which is a very good improvement if you compare to the previous Pocket 3 or even Pocket 4. Maybe this is the reason why the Pocket 4P doesn't come with any hard case or gimbal protector at all. There are many feature and software upgrades, and I'm not going to go through them again in this video, but one that I particularly like and want to mention again is that you can shoot video at slow shutter speed down to 1/4 second, which means you can create some dreamy slow shutter speed footage that most cameras cannot do. This is one of those changes that you won't see on the packaging, but actually super useful if you are a creative person. The Osmo Pocket 4P's wide-angle camera uses a 1-inch sensor, which is the same size as the Pocket 4, but it is actually a completely different sensor. This is a new type of sensor that many people may never have heard of before. It's called a LOFIC sensor. LOFIC stands for Lateral Overflow Integration Capacitor. It's a sensor technology designed to improve dynamic range. In a normal camera sensor, each pixel can only store a limited amount of light before the highlights crypt to pure white. Once highlights are crypted, that cannot be recovered. A LOFIC sensor adds extra storage next to each pixel, allowing it to capture overflow light information instead of simply losing it. The practical benefit is actually quite simple. If you have ever filmed a sunset or a person standing in front of a window, you have probably had to choose between protecting the highlight or keeping the shadow detail. The whole idea behind this new sensor is to reduce that compromise and give you more flexibility when shooting difficult scenes. Look at this video clip I shot when I walk out from a little dark tunnel. Usually a shot like this means I have to sacrifice either the highlight or the shadow, but the new LOFIC sensor managed to keep details in both highlight and shadow, which is very impressive. Compared to traditional HDR processing, which often combines multiple exposures together, LOFIC can achieve a higher dynamic range from a single exposure. That makes them much more useful for video and fast-moving scenes. With this new LOFIC sensor for the wide-angle camera, DJI claims it can deliver up to 17 stops of dynamic range, which is 3 stops more than the already impressive Pocket 4. And to handle this extra dynamic range, DJI has also created a new version of the D-Log2 log profile. So on the Pocket 4P, if you record video using the wide-angle camera, you can choose between the normal profile, D-Log and D-Log2. Hey, this is Richard from the future because I have to make some changes to my review. In my original scripts, I said the Pocket 4P cannot record HDR video straight out of camera, but DJI has just released a new firmware which adds HDR video output. What it means is you don't need to do any editing and you can play back HDR video recorded by the Pocket 4P on supported hardware. You can enable color recovery setting to preview the normal color and contrast instead of just the flat log color, which would be hard to tell what the actual footage will be like after grading. There's also the exposure number to tell you if the scene is under or overexposed and by how much, so it is easy to get good exposure even if you shoot full menu. So let's do some tests and see whether this new sensor really delivers better dynamic range in the real world. First, I lined up the Pocket 4P, Pocket 4 and Pocket 3 side by side. I set all of them to Pro mode so I could manually control the settings. Same white balance, same exposure level, everything matched as closely as possible. I wanted a very high contrast scene, so I chose a sunny day with strong, bright sunlight outside. I turned off all the indoor lights to keep the interior dark to increase contrast. The goal was to see how much highlight and shadow detail I could recover from each camera. For this test, the Pocket 4P and Pocket 4 were both shooting in D-Log, while the Pocket 3 was shooting in D-Log-M because it doesn't support full D-Log. All 3 cameras were recording at the exact same time using equivalent exposure settings and at base ISO. Let's look at shadow recovery. If we zoom into the darkest area, surprisingly there isn't a huge difference between the 3 cameras. If you look at the color chart and the black box, the results are actually fairly similar. One thing I did notice is that the Pocket 4P stays remarkably clean even after aggressive shadow recovery. Now let's look at the highlights and see how much detail we can recover there. This time the difference is much bigger. On the Pocket 3, the area outside the window is completely blown out. If we compare the Pocket 4P and the Pocket 4, look at the area outside the window. The Pocket 4P still retains a lot of highlight details. You can clearly see the blue sky and the clouds. On the Pocket 4, you can only barely make out the sky. And if you look at the bright white area near the bottom of the frame, the Pocket 4P still preserves some detail there, while the Pocket 4 is completely blown out. In this test, both the Pocket 4 and Pocket 4P were shooting in D-Log. Now, what about Pocket 4P's new D-Log2 profile? Would switching to D-Log2 actually capture more dynamic range? Since I don't have 2 Pocket 4P to shoot at different picture profile at exactly the same time, I set up another scene at night using studio lights, so the lighting would remain 100% consistent between recordings. Usually, I do dynamic range tests at the lowest possible ISO because that is usually the base ISO. For the Pocket 4P, the lowest ISO available when shooting in D-Log is ISO 400, but surprisingly, when switching to D-Log2, the camera actually lets you choose ISO 100. This is a little strange because normally the higher the dynamic range a picture profile can capture, the higher the base ISO tends to be. So I wonder how come I can choose a lower ISO when shooting in D-Log2. I did some tests myself and found that D-Log2 seems to perform best around ISO 800 to ISO 1600 in terms of highlight retention. When I shoot at lower ISO, I lose more highlight detail. I later checked with DJI and asked them what ISO setting they recommend. They suggest ISO 800 during the day and ISO 1600 at night when shooting in D-Log2. For this comparison test, I shot D-Log at ISO 400 and D-Log2 at ISO 1600. Let's look at the shadow area first. D-Log2 seems to recover slightly more shadow detail than the regular D-Log, but it also introduced a bit more noise. So overall, I would say the shadow image quality is fairly similar in this test. But once we look at highlights, the difference becomes very obvious. Look at the bright highlight area on the plastic container. In the D-Log footage, that area is completely blown out. But in the D-Log2 footage, I can recover almost all of the highlight detail. You can also see the difference clearly on the label near the top of the frame. D-Log2 definitely preserves significantly more highlight information. Now, 17 stops of dynamic range is a really huge number. It's cinema camera level, and it's more than any full-frame camera I have personally tested. So I thought, why not compare it against a full-frame camera? For this test, I compared it against my Panasonic Lumix S5 II, which Panasonic claims it delivers more than 14 stops of dynamic range, and while there are some camera delivers more dynamic range, but the S5 II currently retails for around US $1,600 body only, so it's still significantly more expensive than the Pocket 4P. Comparing footage from both cameras, the full-frame S5 II is definitely cleaner in the shadows, not surprisingly as the sensor is about 7 times larger in size. But if you look at the highlights, the Pocket 4P actually preserves noticeably more highlight detail than the S5 II. While I cannot tell you if the difference is really 3 stops, but the difference is very obvious. The S5 II still has advantages in areas like the shadow area image quality, and it can render much more shadow depth of field if that's what you want. At the same time, if you consider the price, the size and weight of the Pocket 4P compared to a full-frame camera like the Lumix S5 II, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of professional filmmakers would want to have a Pocket 4P in their camera bag as their second camera. Now, while I'm certainly very impressed, there are still a few limitations worth mentioning. First, there's no auto ISO available when shooting in D-Log2, so you need to manually choose your ISO settings. Second, D-Log2 is only available on the wide-angle camera and fixed at one-time zoom. This is not very ideal, as if you want to maximize the dynamic range, every time when you switch to the 3x zoom lens, you have to go into the menu to switch the profile back to D-Log first, which slows down your workflow a bit. I do have a workaround that allows me to switch much faster between D-Log2 and D-Log. So what I did is I create 2 different custom profiles, C1 and C2, one for the D-Log2 and one for the D-Log, and then I assign the single click of the custom button to switch between C1 and C2. This way I can very quickly switch between D-Log2 and D-Log1. While we have spent quite a bit of time talking about dynamic range and image quality, there's one thing that is a little harder to measure with charts and test scenes, and that's color. When I look back at the footage I shot in Melter with the Pocket 4P, one of the first things that stands out to me is just how beautiful the colors look. The landscapes look fantastic. The blue Mediterranean water, the warm sandstone building, the colorful boats, and even simple everyday scene all have a very pleasing look straight out of the camera. People also look great. Now, to be fair, Melter is an incredibly photogenic place. The scenery is beautiful, the weather was fantastic, and those things certainly help. But I think the Pocket 4P deserves a lot of credit as well. It consistently produces footage that look great straight out of camera without needing much work in post. I also spent quite a bit of time shooting in D-Log2, and I have been very impressed with the results as well. Using DJI's official LUT as a starting point, the footage retains a very natural look while still preserving an impressive amount of dynamic range. Of course, color preference is always subjective, and everyone has their own taste. But personally, I really like the look coming out of the Pocket 4P. Whether I was shooting landscapes, city scenes, or people, I found the colors consistently pleasing and easy to work with in post-production. I noticed DJI has increased the maximum ISO on the Pocket 4P compared to its predecessors. When shooting in the normal picture profile, the Pocket 4P can go all the way up to ISO 25600, while the Pocket 4 maxes out at ISO 12800, and the Pocket 3 tops out at ISO 6400. On paper, that suggests the Pocket 4P should offer better high ISO performance than both the Pocket 4 and Pocket 3. So let's compare the image quality side by side between the Pocket 4P, Pocket 4 and Pocket 3 when shooting in the normal picture profile. At lower ISOs, there really isn't a huge difference in image quality between all these three cameras in this controlled test. Shadow detail is very similar across all three cameras, just like the previous tests, but if you look at the bright white label on the plastic container, you can see the Pocket 4P manages to preserve more highlight detail. So it seems that even when shooting in the normal picture profile, the Pocket 4P is still benefiting from the improved dynamic range of the new sensor. At around ISO 1600, I can start to see more noise coming from the Pocket 3. As we continue increase the ISO, the two 4th generation Pocket cameras clearly maintain better image quality than the Pocket 3. To be fair, the Pocket 3 still delivers surprisingly usable image quality even at ISO 6400, which really shows how impressive that camera still is. At ISO 12800, the Pocket 4P and the Pocket 4 are actually fairly similar. But if we look a little closer, you can see the Pocket 4P is slightly cleaner. It's not a huge difference, but definitely noticeable enough once you start pixel peeping. Apart from the studio test, I also went out and did some real-world side-by-side comparison with the Pocket 4 and Pocket 3. The first set of footage was shot during the day. Everything was filmed in full auto mode, auto exposure, auto white balance, and using the normal picture profile. Overall, there really isn't a huge difference between all three cameras. But when I look a bit closer, I do notice that the Pocket 4 and Pocket 4P have slightly better contrast and color compared to the Pocket 3. My skin tone also look more natural on the Pocket 4 and Pocket 4P. Detail rendering also seems slightly better on the Pocket 4 and Pocket 4P. Thanks to the gimbal, all three cameras produce very smooth footage, but I did notice that when I was running, the Pocket 3 seems to have a tiny bit more vibration compared to the Pocket 4 and Pocket 4P. To be fair, none of these differences are huge, but they are noticeable when comparing the footage side by side. Then I shot some videos at night, again using auto exposure and auto white balance. The Pocket 4 and 4P performs a bit better with less noise in shadow areas. The Pocket 4P is definitely the best overall. Not only is it cleaner, but it also retains more detail under low light. This was actually quite a challenging scene because not only it was fairly dark and my face was lit by a mix of different street lights and car lights. The Pocket 4P gets closest to my real skin tone here. And this is something I noticed repeatedly with my other real-world video clips as well. Pocket 4P's skin tone almost always looks very nice and accurate. After this test, I thought, why not compare the Pocket 4P against my full-frame Panasonic Lumix S5 II again? The Lumix S5 II has very good low light performance and has very similar performance to the best low light cameras in the market like the Sony FX3. I shoot in low light mode with the Pocket 4P and left everything in auto. On the Lumix S5 II, I mounted the Lumix 18mm f1.8 lens and set it to f2 to match the Pocket 4P. Shutter speed was set to 1/52 and auto ISO enabled. During the test, I noticed the S5 II's ISO was hovering between ISO 12,800 and 25,600, so it was definitely a very dark environment. The S5 II is still better overall, however, the difference is quite small. I didn't imagine a 1-inch sensor could produce image quality this comparable at such high ISO. Another thing I noticed is that while Lumix has some of the best image stabilization in the industry, and that's one of the reasons I love shooting video with Lumix cameras, but the Lumix still cannot quite match the gimbal stabilization on the Pocket 4P. The Pocket 4P is simply much more stable. If you look at the background, especially near the edges of the frame, you can clearly see how much steadier the Pocket 4P footage is. Now, one major difference between the two cameras is depth of field. Even though I was shooting with the same aperture value with both cameras, the S5 II has much shallower depth of field because of the much larger full-frame sensor. So if you want stronger background separation, if you want to blur the background more, the Pocket 4P simply cannot match it. But on the other hand, if you actually want deeper depth of field, for example when shooting travel vlogs where you want to clearly see the background, then if you shoot with the S5 II, you will need to stop down the camera a lot more to around f5.6 to get similar depth of field to the Pocket 4P. And if you do that when shooting under low light condition, it has a huge impact on S5 II's image quality. In that kind of scenario, the Pocket 4P would actually deliver noticeably better image quality. The DJI Osmo Pocket 4 was the first consumer-level camera capable of recording high-quality 4K 240 frames per second video. The Pocket 4P of course can do the same. With the wide-angle camera, you can capture 4K 240 footage. There is a small crop if you shoot in 4K 200 or 4K 240, but the image quality remains very impressive even at these extremely high frame rates. If you shoot at 120 frames per second, there's no crop at all. With the 3x zoom camera, you can record up to 200 frames per second. That's slightly slower than the wide-angle camera, but still extremely fast compared to other similar cameras in the market. There's also a small crop at 200 frames per second, but once again, the image quality is very respectable. The ability to shoot at these frame rates from a camera this small and at this price point is genuinely impressive. It allows you to capture some really unique and fun footage that even 120 frames per second simply cannot match. And now having the ability to shoot slow motion with the 3x zoom camera is a big bonus. For me, many of the slow motion shots I want to capture are usually further away from the camera, so having the extra reach gives me a lot more creative freedom when composing shots. Now let's talk about some limitations. If you want to shoot slow motion video, you are limited to either 1x or 3x zoom, and you also cannot switch between 1x and 3x during recording. And just like the Pocket 4, slow motion recording is only available in the normal picture profile. You cannot choose D-Log or D-Log2 when you're recording slow motion video. When I tested the Osmo Pocket 4 a few months ago, I was already very impressed by its subject tracking system. It was able to track subjects extremely well, even in some very tricky situations. This time, DJI has upgraded the system to Active Track 8.0, and one of the biggest improvements is that it can track subjects even when using the 3x zoom camera. So let's see how it performs. For this test, I'm showing screen recordings from the DJI Mimo smartphone app, so you can clearly see what the tracking system is doing. At 1x zoom, the tracking works very well as expected, even when the subject becomes quite small in the frame. I can also zoom in while recording, and the camera continues following the subject without any issues. Even after switching to the 3x zoom camera, tracking remains very reliable. At 6x zoom, it works well. And even at 12x zoom, it continues to track accurately. I also did some testing at night. To make things even more challenging, I tracked someone wearing a black t-shirt in a crowded area. Because it was at night and many other people were also wearing dark clothing, it would have been very easy for the tracking system to get confused. But Active Track 8.0 managed to follow my subject flawlessly, even after he disappeared behind other people multiple times. When the subject gets too small, it's hard to track, but the opposite is also true. When I did this test at 12x zoom, the car I was tracking eventually gets very close to the camera. That's often a challenging situation for many tracking systems when the subject fills most of the frame, but this wasn't a problem here. The Pocket 4P continued tracking the car successfully, even when it was briefly blocked by another vehicle. Using the Active Track not only allows us to follow subject's movement, it also allows us to capture vlogging style video easily, as the camera would automatically follow my face no matter how I point the camera. Active Track also allows us to capture some creative shots like this orbit shot very easily. You just need to tap the subject on the screen, then walk around and let the Active Track and the gimbal to do its work. So overall, I'm extremely impressed. Among all the different camera brands I have tested, DJI is definitely class leading when it comes to subject tracking. Adding the 3x zoom camera and extended zoom range isn't just about adding another lens. It's not only image quality that matters, all the supporting features need to work well too. Otherwise, the extra zoom simply isn't that useful in practice. So we just look at Active Track 8.0 and saw that it can track subjects extremely well even at 12x zoom. But what about stabilization? After all, the gimbal stabilization is probably the biggest selling point of the entire Osmo Pocket series. With a heavier camera module and much longer focal lengths, the demand on the gimbal system are significantly higher than on any previous Osmo Pocket camera. So let's do some tests and see how it performs. Alright, let's do some stabilization tests. I'm going to lock the gimbal, which doesn't mean the gimbal is completely locked. What it means is it will lock the direction of the gimbal, so we can see whether the gimbal managed to lock the direction or not when I'm walking. So let's start with one time, and let me press and hold to lock the gimbal and see whether it's smooth or not. I think it's pretty good, very stable. And now let me turn around and do a 3 times zoom, switch to the other camera. So it will be more demanding because it's 3 times. And let's see how it works. It seems pretty good to me. Alright, now let me turn around and go for something a little bit more extreme. Let's go for the 6 times zoom. So that is pretty demanding. Let's see whether this little gimbal can give me good performance or not. Alright, now let me do a 12 time walking test. The results are very impressive. Even at 12 times zoom, the footage remains remarkably smooth. And if you look at behind the scene footage, you'll notice my hands were not particularly steady at all. I purposely wasn't trying to do a perfect ninja walk because I want to simulate how an average person would actually use the camera in real world. Despite that, the stabilization still does an excellent job. Of course, just walking is one thing. Here's what happens when I deliberately shake the camera much more violently. Alright, now let me try shake the camera a bit. I still lock the gimbal. Alright, let's try 3 times. And let me try 6 times. That is pretty impressive. And let me go extreme to 12 times. And let's see. That still look pretty good. Now, nobody in their right mind would use the camera like this. But the stabilization works very well in real-world situations too. When I was in Malta, one of the morning I took a boat trip across the sea as well as a tour bus, which was really bumpy in a few places. But the gimbal on the Pocket 4P handles it exceptionally well. The only thing you need to be careful is that when you are walking, there could be a bit of up-down movement. It's because the Pocket 4P has a 3-axis gimbal, so physically it just cannot fix the up-down movement. The fact that it is a small and lightweight camera actually means the camera has less inertia to help reduce or slow down the up-down movement. Other than that, Pocket 4P's stabilization just works really well as you have just seen. Another brand new feature is a little gadget called Frame Tab. This is a tiny remote control with a touch screen on it. Now, this is technically not brand new as the Frame Tab was released with the Osmo Mobile 8P as the removable panel for the gimbal. But now, this is the first time it is released as an accessory. So let's go out and do a little test and see how it works. Alright, let me do some testing of this little remote, the Osmo frame tab, and press this button to start it up. Alright, booting up. And searching for device. Oh, found it already. And oh, I can see myself. Alright, let me start recording. I think I can press this button. Yes, I can start recording. Pressing this button. And what can I do? Oh, I can use the little joystick to control framing. Yes, I can adjust the zoom as well. Can I tap it to track myself? Oh yes, I can. Tap on it to track myself. What else I can do? Oh yes, I can press this button to switch between 1 and 3 times zoom. Let's go back to 1 time. Alright, now let's see how far I can walk away from the camera. And does it work? Okay, it's tracking me. Okay, let's see how far I can walk away from the Pocket 4P. And the remote will still work. I'm about now maybe 10 meters away. Yeah, it still works and it's still tracking me. I'm pretty small in the screen, especially in this little screen. This screen is not that big. So yeah, I can barely see myself in this screen, but yes, it is still working. Pretty good. I'm about probably 15-20 meters, getting close to 20 meters, and it is still working. That is pretty good. And now I am 20 meters, or getting close to 25 meters. And is it still working? Yeah, and it still tracked me. I'm very far away. That is impressive. Alright, let me walk a little bit further away. Oh, there's not much space I can go. Is it still working? Yes, it's still working. Oh, I think tracking lost me now. But to be fair, I'm so far away. It can't see me. That's pretty acceptable. Like, I'm probably only a few pixels big in the frame, but the remote control still works and the video feed is still working, even though I'm probably 30 meters away and there's nowhere I can go. So that is good, very good. After that, I decided to do one more test because I wanted to see just how far the signal transmission could reach in a much larger open area. Now I'm at the gate, so this is at the end of the street. And yes, I can still remote control. I am very far away from the camera. At the end, I walked approximately 200 meters or 650 feet away. I probably could push even more, but I didn't want to go because I have an unreleased camera 200 meters away, so I don't want someone to take the camera and run away. Now keep in mind, it was with direct line of sight and not tons of radio interference, so the maximum range you could get may vary. But no matter what, this is still a pretty impressive range. However, the real selling point here isn't just the range, it's the friction-free convenience for solo creators. You can see live feed from the screen. You can remote control the Pocket 4P using the buttons, joystick, and the touch screen. You can also use it as a remote trigger for photos. This little remote can also be used to remote playback the video that you have captured. But since the screen is quite small, so it's just more for you to make sure you have captured the video correctly rather than doing any critical review of the footage. Previously, you can do similar thing using the DJI Mimo phone app, but one problem with any phone app that need to connect to your device is that it takes quite a bit of time to establish the connection. And all this just creates a bit of friction, especially when you just want to quickly check the framing or do some quick adjustment remotely. Using the frame tab makes the whole process just much quicker and removes a lot of that friction. Now, there are also a few things that you should be aware of. The frame tab is quite a small device, so good thing is it fits into the carry case very easily, but the screen is only 1.4 inches and the brightness is only okay, especially when you use it on a bright sunny day. The frame tab cannot be used with the DJI Mimo app at the same time. You can only connect the Pocket 4P to one of them. I think most people buy Osmo Pocket cameras primarily for video rather than photography. But now, with this new high dynamic range 1-inch sensor on the wide-angle camera and the addition of the new 3x zoom camera, the Pocket 4P is actually a pretty capable photo camera as well, especially now that it includes the new Super Photo mode, which can capture images at up to 37 megapixels, around 4 times higher resolution than the Pocket 3. Just like the Pocket 4, you can shoot in either 16:9 or 1:1 aspect ratio, although both modes using a different crop of the sensor. DJI also added a new live photo feature which captures a short video clip when you shoot a photo. One thing I found particularly interesting is the resolution of photos captured in Super Photo mode. Both the wide-angle camera and the 3x zoom camera produce images at 7680 pixels times 4320 pixels. And do you know why that's interesting? Because that is exactly the same aspect ratio and resolution for 8K video. Some of you may remember, a few months after the Osmo Action 6 was released, DJI added 8K recording through a firmware update. Now, before everyone gets too excited, I'm not saying DJI is definitely going to add 8K recording, but the 8K resolution photo output certainly makes you wonder whether it's technically possible. I think we'll just have to wait and see. Just like the Pocket 4, the Pocket 4P also comes with the new bigger 1545 mAh battery, which is about 19% larger than the Pocket 3. However, with the bigger dual camera module, new hardware, larger gimbal system to power, and the new high dynamic range LOFIC sensor, I was curious to see what the battery life would actually be like. So I did another side-by-side test, which I have the Pocket 3, Pocket 4 and 4P together record 4K 25 video with default settings and see how long they last. So the Pocket 3 has the shortest battery life, but it still lasts almost 142 minutes, which is not bad. The Pocket 4P came second with 159 minutes, but it's the Pocket 4 that is longest that managed to record 221 minutes. Results for the Pocket 3 and Pocket 4 are both slightly better than what I got in my Pocket 4 review, maybe because I'm recording 4K 25 instead of 4K 30, but the results are quite consistent. I did one more test recording in 1080p, and the Pocket 4P managed to record almost 3 hours continuously, which is really decent. When I was in Malta, it was pretty hot there. Temperature gets up to around 30 degrees Celsius, and it was super sunny, which is the worst thing for overheat. But I have no overheat issue at all, even when I was recording in 4K 60. However, another thing I want to mention is that the camera would heat up much faster when you are shooting 4K 240 because it has to process a huge amount of data. In my studio, I was able to record somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes of 4K 240 video continuously before the camera overheat. While that may not sound like a lot, even 10 minutes of 4K 240 video will give you 18 minutes of 4K 30 slow motion video. That is a lot of slow motion video and probably more than what most people would need it. Before we get to the final thoughts, there are a few other things worth mentioning. When you attach the wide angle lens attachment, the Pocket 4P will detect that, and there is a little icon on the screen to remind you that you have the wide angle attachment attached to it. This is a small but actually very important feature because with the new design, you may not even remember that you have the wide angle lens attachment attached to the camera. There's also a new multi-person tracking mode. When you enable it, the camera will try to detect multiple persons in the scene, and it will adjust the gimbal and try to get all the detected subjects inside the frame, instead of just following one subject. This is very useful when you are filming a group of people, say you are traveling with your friends and want to keep everyone inside the frame. The camera now has a new defog feature which helps minimize fog buildup on the lens. One thing I've complained in my Pocket 4 review and I want to bring it up again is that the Pocket 4P still doesn't have a true vertical video mode. So if you shoot vertically, it's still just cropping the sensor and give you 3K resolution. Focus breathing can still be quite noticeable with both the wide angle and 3x zoom camera. If you find it distracting, make sure to turn on breathing compensation. The field of view will be slightly tighter, but breathing compensation does a very good job in making focus breathing almost not noticeable. While the Pocket 4P with the dual camera module definitely feels bigger and heavier than the Pocket 3 and Pocket 4. However, if you carry it with the official carry case, then the difference is not really that noticeable. The new carry case for the 4P is only slightly larger than the one for the Pocket 4 or Pocket 3. The frame tab itself doesn't have any tripod mount or any other mount, but the back of the device has a magnet, so you can stick it to metal surface easily. This is probably one of the longest video I have worked on for quite a while. I don't mean the length of this video, which is not short, but the amount of time I spent testing this camera and using it in real-world situations. My folder with all the test results and real-world video and photos is about 1.5 terabyte. Looking back at the very first notes I wrote when I received the camera, it made me realize how much my thoughts have changed over the past few months. At the beginning, the new 3x zoom camera was definitely the feature that excited me the most. Having a longer native focal length in a pocket camera is definitely a fantastic addition. But if you ask me today what I like most about the Pocket 4P, it's actually the wide angle camera. More specifically, is the new LOFIC sensor used by this camera, because I genuinely think it's an amazing piece of technology. Camera sensor technology hasn't really seen a major leap for quite a while, but to me, the LOFIC sensor feels like a real breakthrough. The improvement in dynamic range is massive and the image quality is simply excellent. Even compared to the new sensor in the Pocket 4, which was only released a few months ago, the Pocket 4P is a significant step forward. And the best part is that I really don't notice any downside. High ISO performance is better, it still records 4K at 240 frames per second, and overall it just feels like a better camera. It really feels like this is the beginning of the next generation of camera sensors. So, is the Pocket 4P the best pocket camera? Well, it's easy to just say yes. That's what YouTubers say all the time, isn't it? But best is actually very hard to define. If you are simply looking for the best image quality, the best sensor, and the strongest specifications, then yes, I do think the Pocket 4P is the best pocket camera DJI or any company has made. But it's also bigger, heavier, and more expensive than the previous pocket cameras. So for some people, the 4P may not really be the best choice. In fact, my father-in-law recently wanted to buy a pocket camera, and I actually recommended him either to get the Pocket 3 or Pocket 4. By the way, I'm also working on a buyer's guide comparing the Osmo Pocket 3, Pocket 4 and Pocket 4P. So if you're interested, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that comparison. Now, as much as I like the Pocket 4P myself, it isn't perfect. There are two things I really like DJI to improve. The first is the gimbal rotation limit, especially the horizontal rotation. Every now and then, when I'm using active track, the camera reaches its rotation limit. It's not a deal breaker, and it has been like that since the very first Osmo Pocket, but I really love to see DJI's engineers find a way to remove that limitation. The second is that D-Log2 is only available on the wide-angle camera. I understand the technical reasons behind it, but having to constantly switching between D-Log2 and D-Log is a bit frustrating, even with the workaround I mentioned earlier, both while shooting and during post-production, since you have to use different LUTs for different clips. On the other hand, I do see there is a very different purpose of each of these cameras. If you're shooting high contrast scene, for example backlit portrait, or anything with really high contrast that traditional cameras cannot handle, this new 1-inch sensor will be perfect for that. On the other hand, the 3x zoom camera is great for portrait, some close-up details, or anything that you want to separate your main subject from the background. The Osmo Pocket 4P is honestly one of the most exciting video cameras I've used in a long time. The new dual camera system, the incredible dynamic range, and the image quality from the LOFIC Sensor, 4K 240 recording, the analog joystick, and all the other improvements really come together to create a camera that goes well beyond what the Pocket 3 or even the Pocket 4 can offer. And with that, I can't help but hope DJI revisits the original Osmo Pro and Osmo Raw concept. Those cameras were built for professional users, but they were released almost 10 years ago, and DJI stopped updating that lineup after the Osmo Pocket came along. Now, with all the technology DJI has today, maybe it's time to revisit that idea. Imagine a slightly larger version of the Pocket 4P with either two 1-inch LOFIC sensors, or perhaps a larger LOFIC sensor paired with a true optical zoom lens. Adds a bigger built-in display with more customizable buttons and controls, and a larger analog joystick. I think that would be an incredible camera for a lot of professional filmmakers. But what do you think? Do you think DJI should build something like that? Or should they stick with the current Pocket design? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you have made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I really appreciate if you could give it a like or leave a comment below.